to this.
This meeting is being recorded.
So welcome everybody to this webinar on looking at some of the excellent work that we've been visiting around the UK. We've been doing a tour of the UK over the last few weeks to find out what's been going on in different places. And this week we're in West Sussex and hearing some of the excellent work that Martin and Chris have been doing within West Sussex County Council. So you'll have read the case study that they contributed to through the National Preparedness Commission, and Judy and myself put those together, and Andrew has shared that. So today we're going to be hearing some of the excellent initiatives that they've been leading on to hear about some of their work. Before I hand over to them, just to give you a little bit of a heads up as to what the future brings around our tour of the UK. So 12th of January, we'll be across in Northern Ireland, hearing some of the excellent work that the community transport have been doing there. Then we're up into North Yorkshire in February. In March, we're going across into Sellafield to hear about some of the work that Sellafield have been doing with their LRF. And then hopefully we will all be meeting in person in Manchester on the 20th and 21st of March. And we have what's emerging to be a really excellent conference package involving presentations from Cabinet Office, DLUC and various others coming together to talk about societal resilience and what the future of that looks like for the UK. So of course, as always, if you wish to follow NCSR, then please do. Please join us. All of the webinars that we have been delivering over the last year and a bit are available on YouTube. Just search NCSR Plus, and you can obviously follow us website and Google and whatnot. You can find out what we've been doing. So without any more introduction, I would like to hand over to Chris and Martin, who I've been watching some of the things that they've been doing over the last few years, and yeah, they're giving a sneak preview just there of that slide. So without me giving any more introduction, I'll hand over to Chris and Martin.
Well, we are. Morning, good afternoon, everybody, from what is a lovely sunny Sussex.
Martin, you're just ever so slightly quiet for me. Andrew, how is it for you?
Yeah, just a little bit more volume would be good. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody, from a lovely sunny Sussex, and welcome to the South Coast from both of us. So this is our presentation on how we've been developing community resilience within Sussex. It's our way of doing things. I know we've shared it with a few colleagues around the country in different guises, but this is what if and how we've been delivering it in Sussex. So if we can have the next slide, please. Affectionately known as Batman and Robin, Chris and I look after the Resilience and Emergencies team for West Sussex County Council and lead on the development of community resilience across the whole of Sussex. So although we're from West Sussex County Council, we're also representatives for Sussex Resilience Forum, and so we'll give you a little bit of an overview of where we are in Sussex, what it looks like, and then we'll lead you on into where we go with the what, or where we're going with the What If programme. So if you could take us on to the next slide, please, Andrew. So as we said, What If You Can Make a Difference is our product that we've developed to promote community resilience across the whole of Sussex, and as you'll see, it's an all-encompassing, totally holistic programme that involves many facets of community resilience. So let's take a quick tour around Sussex. So next one, please, Andrew. So there we are, dotted right down on the south coast with their neighbours Hampshire and Kent to the south. Sorry, east and west, and Surrey to the north, and their nearest neighbours to the south are are the French. So if we need much mutual aid from across the border, it takes a little while to get here from France, but we haven't had to call on it just yet. Next one, please. So this is basically what this is the boundary of Sussex from their furthest point over in West, just outside of Portsmouth, going across to the Kent border. And there'll probably be a few names on there that you might recognise and be familiar with. Obviously Hastings and Gatwick Airport might be certainly ones that you might have visited before. Next one, please, Andrew. So one of our key hotspots and areas of, yeah, just keep clicking through and Andrew, and I'll pick them up, is Brighton and all of its culture and amazing places that there are within the city. We're actually sitting right smack middle in the centre of the South Downs National Park. We've got Goodwood and glorious Goodwood with the horse racing, and also some of you may well have visited some of the motor racing events such as Festival of Speed and Goodwood Revival, which are two of the largest events that we host in Sussex. We do have a bit of heritage with regards to local monuments and castles, etc. That castle there that you can see is Arundel Castle, which is the home of the Duke of Norfolk, who you would have probably seen at a very high profile as the Air Marshal of the Queen's funeral, and also busy planning the King's coronation at the moment. A few names that are based here: Rolls-Royce Motor Company have got most of their car manufacturing in the area, and we do get a number of prestigious visitors that come in and pick up their new vehicles. I think it should be one more, please, Andrew. I think, yeah, and another one that is fairly famous as well. That's the infamous Pooh Bridge. The bridge that you can see in the picture. The first one is the one that's in the actual original book, but the one is the one that's recently been rebuilt because it's been worn out by the number of people going over it. And also, you probably noticed there's not that many trees around it because everybody keeps pulling bits off the trees to play poo sticks. Where are we going now? Right, so this is just an overview of the risk profile of Sussex. So obviously we're down on the coast. We do get a fair share of storms, particularly coming up the channel, and we also tend to get the tail end of a lot of stuff that comes up across northern France and northern Europe as well. Particularly we get a very fair share of air thunderstorms coming up across the Bay of Biscay and across the channel, and usually striking us between Hampshire and Otherwise moving out into Kent and up towards the London area. You can go to the next one, please, Andrew. Heat waves, obviously, like most people, we experience a heat wave in the summer, but the heat wave generally in the southeast can be quite a significant challenge, and we did at one stage during the heat wave last year hold the record for the highest UK recorded temperature for a couple of days just north of Gatwick Airport. That obviously attracts a huge amount of visitors to the south coast, particularly the Brighton area. That was a tremendous challenge during the COVID lockdown periods, or the brief unlocking of COVID periods, when we were absolutely inundated with visitors from all parts of the UK. Next one, please, Andrew. As I said, we get a fair share of torrential rain, particularly thunderstorms. Surface water flooding is certainly becoming much more of an issue, far more than it ever was before. We've got 4 or 5 main rivers within Sussex, which are generally fairly predictable with regards to where they stay and when they come out of their banks and where they go. And there's been a lot of investment in some flood protection, but we're certainly finding a much larger challenge with surface water flooding as you'll see from the fort where we created the What If programme, you'll see some of the challenges that it creates. With the next one, please, Andrew. Also linked to the heat wave, but also because of the development and aging infrastructure within the area, we do seem to get our unfair share of utility failures, particularly with water. There is obviously a finite amount of water in the southeast, and tremendous demands put on the system, and often demand outstrips supply, causing the aging infrastructure to fail. So yeah, we've had more than our fair share of really significant water outages. Won't mention any particular water companies, but if you look at the national news, you might get an idea of who a few of those are. Because some of them tend to pump raw sewage into the sea on a regular basis as well. Next one, please. Obviously, like most parts of the country, we do get severe blizzards. This is a good example of how the southeast can easily be brought to a standstill. You might jest, but that's generally that amount of snow falling in the southeast would probably mean chaos, at least until lunchtime, if not longer. So yeah, we don't know what to do with snow down here, apart from look at it and go, and wait for it to melt. But other than that, we're not particularly well prepared for that sort of severe weather down here. Next one, please. And the last shot there is just that we do have a much higher elderly population than other parts of the country. We have a lot of people moved down from London and other parts of the area. We as a local authority, we particularly have a lot of challenges in providing accommodation, because a lot of the areas like to bring their residents or their care needs down this way, because we're so much cheaper and we seem to be geared up. But we do have a much larger population of elderly folk down this way, lovely as they are. But yeah, just I think that's me and Chris on a nice day, wasn't it? We're getting there. So over to you, Chris, for the next one, I think.
Yeah, next slide. So the programme, What If You Can Make a Difference? This really kicked off, as it were, following a fairly significant flooding event. If you could do the next slide, please. So yeah, this was back in 2012. Most of the population were probably getting ready for the Olympics at this point. Some of that Olympic planning did get put on hold. We had some flooding, which was really extensive down here, particularly along the south coast. Rainfall figures had been astronomical, and particularly over sort of 3 consecutive days, where there was over 800 properties impacted by significant flooding. As I said, mostly along what we would call as the Manhood Peninsula, but that was sort of Bognor Regis, just outside of Chichester, through Littlehampton and on to Worthing. Entire communities were stranded in many respects, and it obviously placed huge problems for the domiciliary care, for emergency services response. And you can see just in the center of the screen there, that radar image, where it's quite rare to see the white color, but this is the most extreme periods of rainfall that we had. And as I say, the flooding did do that. We had more than 4 inches of rain in just one 24-hour period. So really significant. Moving on a little from that, obviously there was a lot of learning, and as possible to find out what it was that would have made life easier for them, how they could have been better prepared. And this was one thing that
This meeting is being recorded.
it's being recorded again. Hopefully you're still hearing me. So yeah, asking that question, what could we have done? Because many communities actually wanted to play more of a part, both in the response and also, of course, from the recovery. So once we'd done this engagement, it was clear that there was a need for signposting to enable communities to prepare, to know what activities they could do in advance, and then during a response time, the activities that they could do to work collaboratively with other agencies. And this really was our opportunity to go away, to think about all of the feedback that we'd got, and to create a package, a training opportunity that we could roll out through our communities. And this is really where we started. So if I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So this program is quite wide-ranging, and we've basically looked at all elements of community resilience. We've put them into a series of sort of 4 themes, but with sustainability and our carbon footprint being very sort of present through all of those. If I could go to the next slide. So here are those main areas, and I will ask at this point a little quiz question that we often put through. Once we've completed this little presentation this morning, if you can think of any areas of community resilience that is not covered by this, we really would like to know. It hasn't happened as yet, so that's not a challenge out there for you within the virtual world. But so far, we have yet to find something that would not be covered by these particular areas. So we've looked at young people and how they can be sustained. We've looked at communities, business resilience, health and well-being, but as I say, with a common thread of sustainability and resilience through all of that. So I'll pass over to Martin, and we'll move on to that first group, the resilient young people. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, as with most things, we firmly believe that the starting point for developing community resilience is with the young people. Chris and I both got a fire service background, and we can well recall the hours, days, months, years that were put into various fire safety messages, particularly those with relation to having smoke alarms fitted into buildings, and we know how important sending that message was through schools and young people. And I don't think we've got a monopoly on the phrase, but certainly the value of pester power, where you can get young people to engage with parents, grandparents, and other relatives. So we decided that we really wanted to make this one of the cornerstones of the work that we're doing down here in Sussex. So if you go to the next slide, please. So a primary vehicle for developing community resilience in West Sussex is something that some of you might be familiar with, is through the Duke of Cornwall Community Safety Award. We've had particular close relations with their colleagues down in Devon and Cornwall in developing it and moulding it to obviously sticking with the framework, the initial framework and design of the awards, but we've sort of moulded it and taken it in a few slightly different directions within Sussex, but obviously using that as the glue that holds it all together. So if you could just move to the next slide, please. Brilliant, thank you. So if you're not familiar with the Duke of Cornwall Award, what is brilliant about it is that it fits in with the four key education stages. So our model is that first stage, key years 1, 2, 3, we work on focusing them on being a safe person within their home. You know, all of the usual safety messages, working with colleagues in fire and rescue service, basic simple first aid steps, keeping safe near water. So it's not a single agency message, it's very much a totally inclusive all hazards approach. The next stage on key stage 2 is more around developing the community safety within their home, but also with their neighbours and friends and relatives. So it's actually spreading that message a bit further and a bit wider, and looking at some of the dangers and potential risks out in the street on the way to school, when they're out to play, doing shopping. But they take a more proactive approach in looking at how they can mitigate some of those dangers. The key stage 3 is very much about what young people can actually do to promote youth or young people's safety, but also community resilience and community safety. And so this again is very much an all hazard approach. We start really strengthening those messages around with resilience, sustainability, about how you can support your neighbourhoods through either an individual approach or a collective approach. And we've had some fantastic results, particularly with organised youth groups such as Scouts and Guides. We run a really good exercise just prior to COVID, where we turned a large scout hall into a rest centre, and we have volunteers from the community that arrived shivering and shaking, and as though they'd been evacuated from a flood area, and the young people gathered all their details, made sure they were warm, safe, assisted with making phone calls for them and providing them with hot food and everything else, and it was absolutely brilliant. The award also fits across all of the education spectrum. Chris and I took particular delight in leading the Duke of Cornwall award with some special education needs, and honestly it was one of the most rewarding and slightly tearful events that we've ever done, but it was an absolutely incredible session. We ran it for about a month with the guys, and it was absolutely incredibly rewarding. So it's something that we're looking to expand going forward. We certainly want to make it far more open and encompassing. We are finding some, to be honest with you, we are finding some challenges with getting into schools purely because they've got the national curriculum to meet, and their timetable is incredibly tight, but we have run after schools clubs. Chris has delivered the Duke of Cornwall Award to a whole school where they had a whole day, and I think it was 400 plus pupils in one of the schools, but they run it as a whole day, which was particularly successful. But I'm sure you guys have experienced it, same as us, but it is an uphill battle sometimes getting into schools. But if you've got a sympathetic board of governors or a head teacher or whatever, then it does make life an awful lot easier. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So, yeah, Chris is going to talk about strong communities.
Yeah, and I think just one point on that Duke of Cornwall, originally when it was first set up, it was only for uniformed groups, but as time wore on, it was then opened up to any youth organisation, so it's made it much more accessible to those. So it's not just Scouts, Brownies and Cadets, etc. So it has made it much more accessible for all of those groups. So on communities, which is our sort of second strand, if you can give me the next slide, please. So following the consultation we had with our communities, we went away, thought of all the points that they wanted to address, and then we put it together with regard to finding, the screen, to produce this introduction to emergencies. So this is the first of two presentations that we've put together. There's quite a bit that's covered in it. The need for why there is a community resilience needs to be developed in that area, of course, and also for local communities to understand how the local authorities work, whether it's an upper tier and lower tier with districts and boroughs, or whether it's through a unitary authority. They don't always understand which areas are supported by which agencies. So again, this is just a little bit of sort of education and signposting. It's also very, very important that whatever is delivered in those communities is absolutely focused on their risks. So if we're inland, the sort of talk or elements of coastal erosion is not relevant. So it's really important that this is delivered looking at their risks for their community. And I think the other important thing to remember that the experts in any given community is usually the people that live there. And therefore they will know where the challenges are. They will know which areas flood or where there are issues with drainage. So these are the people that we need to listen to and how we can support them going forward. So we covered that emergency response, both in those sort of early quick time response, but equally that slow burn incident where we can actually get messaging out in advance. They have their own systems of cascade following this, so that they've got a way of sharing stuff with their community by whatever method it is. They don't need to reinvent that wheel because a lot of those connections are already there. But the priority of all of this is about keeping safe and keeping others safe from harm. So invariably, it's more about how to prevent the situation from becoming worse, knowing where to seek support and making a difference that you can do safely. If I could move on to the next slide, please. So the second part is the what if you can make a difference, and this is looking very much more at the activities that communities can engage with, but to do it in a way that is safe. So if I could have the next slide, I'll just cover the main points of this section. So we don't frighten them off too much with risk assessment, but we do point out, that we all make risk assessments every day in crossing a road, for example, and finding a safe place to do it. So we can actually simplify it, but they need to understand what it is that can cause them harm and what steps they could take to minimize or eliminate that harm. The different methods of being able to warn and inform. And there are very specific hazards that we look at, such as electricity power lines down, for example, or working near water, and particularly working near a highway, whether it's illuminated, whether it's poor light conditions or winter weather. It's about that leadership, and it's just making people feel enabled to be able to support. We also, do quite a bit of myth busting out there. There are people frightened to do certain activities because they feel that somebody might come back and make some sort of claim against them. So we do refer to the SARA Act, which has made such a difference, that social action, responsibility and heroism, which came in 2015. So we can give some reassurance about activities that can be done safely, how to keep themselves safe. And the other point, when we were putting all of this together, we really felt that we might have needed a sort of carrot to get people on board, having gone away to work this out. We had some money that was unallocated from the watershed programme at that financial year. So we used some of that money to purchase community resilience equipment, things such as high-vis jackets, some head torches, wind-up radio, a megaphone, hazard tape, cones, road closure signs, this type of thing that could make as it were, a first aid kit for communities to be able to help themselves in those early stages and to prevent harm coming worse. We could have the next slide. This was a sort of typical example of the equipment that we would provide to those communities. You see also there's some glow sticks there, snow shovels, etc. So this then enabled them to carry out some of this planned work that they were then informed that they could do it and do it safely. In hindsight, did we need to provide that equipment to sell the program to our communities? Arguably not. Word of mouth and peer pressure certainly had quite a significant part to play in that. That said, by actually providing that equipment, I felt that we've then enabled those communities to go ahead and to carry out those functions safely. It was a very small outlay, and certainly we've already received more feedback and probably saved in the long term a lot of money, heartache, and worries for some of the local authorities and other responders. So in essence, I would certainly do it again, and it's really paying off now, because parishes that have had this training delivered have then shared it with their parishes that are neighbours to them, which has then made an even greater pool of resource, that should an area get affected by an event of this nature, that they've got more people that can support those communities. If we can go on to the next slide, I'll pass over to Martin.
Thank you, Chris. Business resilience was obviously, we saw from previous flooding events and various other things, and as I said before, Chris and I have got a fire service background, so we know what the impacts of emergencies and local disasters can have on businesses. So we put our heads together and looked at some of the tools that we'd already got and what we could do to enhance them. So, excuse me, if we could have the next slide, please, Andrew. So, as a local authority, as most of you, or a lot of you that are on the call today will know, that under the Civil Contingencies Act, we've got a statutory duty to promote business continuity and support local businesses in developing business continuity. So we took that as the foundation on how we wanted to build developing that wider community resilience within the business community. So one of the first steps that we did was we looked at what we do when we engage with businesses, particularly through fire service, fire safety legislation, and with the support of colleagues in fire and rescue, we came up with a relatively simple checklist of, again, that all hazard approach with regards to what could cause your business harm, what could you do with regards to putting mitigation in place. Really simple steps about, are you at risk of flooding? What would you do if you lost your power? Have you got contact details of staff available when you're off premises, out of hours? Have you got contact details of suppliers and providers and things like that that you can readily access if you need them? We did do some hard sell with some of it and explain that this is all evidentially based, but as it says in the bottom corner there, that 4 out of 5 businesses who suffer serious disruption won't recover, or if they do recover, it certainly won't be in the way that they've previously been operating. We've done a lot of work with Sussex Chamber of Commerce as one example, but we've got local economic areas that we work to support. We work with areas particularly around Gatwick Airport. There's a business area there called Gatwick Diamond, and there are other local enterprise zones that we engage with as well. But one of the important messages that we try and sell when we go out to local businesses is, not only do you need to protect your own business and ensure that you're resilient so that you're able to recover, but in being able to recover quickly or being able to operate in times of crisis means that very often as local businesses, you'll be looked at as areas that the local community can call upon for support. And particularly when we've done the sessions that Chris has just talked about with the community engagement, we make a real effort to encourage local business groups, local traders associations, and bring them in, because local businesses are as much the community as the individuals that they serve. So we do really make a conscious effort. And obviously we took some knocks during COVID, but we also, our local businesses did rally to support particularly the most vulnerable members of the community. And we're starting to rebuild that relationship that we had with those. So it's not our strongest area by any means with regards to business engagement, but it's certainly not one that we're losing focus on or wishing to remove any effort from. If you can move to the next slide, please, Andrew.
So health and well-being. This is a bit of a cover-all, because I'm sure we're all aware there are so many agencies out there putting out their messages. If you could do the next slide, we've got some examples there. Some of them are straight from sort of NHS England, or now through the integrated care boards or integrated care partnerships. So that there's been a massive change in the way that the health sector has been rebuilt, as it were, since the CCG's demise just recently in legislation. And although there is a very common message, I think one of the key things that I've learned through working with the many people within the health agency is this making every contact count. And I think really that's one of the cornerstones for this program. So whichever audience you're engaged with, this is about making sure that they get all of the information available to them. So it's bringing in information and guidance from NHS England, from our local integrated care boards, from other agencies. I mean, on the top left there, we've got the Priority Services Register. It's also about promoting that on behalf of our utility companies to make sure that those vulnerable people in society are flagged up early on in those responses, and that additional measures can be put in place to support those people during times of outage of whichever that utility provider is. So it's about being a one-stop shop. It's bringing all of those various agencies and various messaging together into one single place where anybody that's there can access, you know, any of those relevant services. But also, you know, if we were there from a health perspective, it's also about advising, have you got smoke alarms fitted? And this is where it becomes a complete wraparound program to ensure that all of those elements can be brought together and there are no sort of silo working between those agencies. If we can go on to the next slide, please. So going forward.
Yeah, if we can take the next one, please, Andrew. And I think maybe we'll do this one as a bit of a double act, is from when we set out on the what if journey, I think we've continually been surprised at what directions we've ended up going in. We've never had a journey's end, as it says on the slide there, because to be honest, we don't know where we're going with it. Often we're pulled in directions that we certainly weren't expecting. With something can happen in the community, we can have meet someone through part of business as normal and suddenly realise that they've got a fantastic ability to support the work that we're doing. So I think the fairest way, and Chris and I often talk about it, is that we just tend to make our way from one milestone to the next milestone as we go, as we move along to wherever it is that we're going off to in the sunset. There are some things that we know we need to focus on, as I mentioned, particularly around business and engagement with the business community, but unfortunately that's a legacy of COVID, like many other things. But I think there's work to be done in that area. We certainly know from work that we're doing with their colleagues in districts and boroughs and parish councils as well, that a key focus of our work going forward is the development of a first place of safety. You'll see the logo on there. That logo, by the way, is work in progress, but that's our logo, working logo for now. So that community halls, village halls, other areas that can provide that initial support to people, not necessarily in times of crisis, but with a view to being almost the first place people congregate to ask for support. Some of the buildings have already got executive networks and community work going on in them, whereas others, particularly in the more remote outlying areas of Sussex, don't have that facility available to us. And other examples where we had an incident right in the middle of the height of the COVID pandemic, where we had a block of flats with over 420 people inside that needed evacuating because of a really serious gas leak, and amongst the rain, sleet and snow at 2 o'clock in the morning, with very little transport available. And what do you do with that number of people? Then certainly having facilities like that first place of safety would have made life an awful lot easier. Chris?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I think perhaps many of you may have already played out the exercise Lima more recently about a national power outage. It was no surprise to us when we ran it just recently that in fact it posed more questions than it provided answers to. And I think this has really bitten hard on all of those partner agencies and really for them looking inwards to find, are they prepared for such an event? And I think there was quite a clear message that some have more work to do. It's interesting when you think back that this program, the What If program, was put together in 2017 when community resilience wasn't so much of a buzzword as it has become in more recent years, with the government looking to get greater community resilience in that sort of societal position. So I think now is absolutely the right time to be focusing on this. But I think it's also important that we don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. You know, this is just what we have put together, but we think the concept of a single community resilience program that covers all of those strands and that can be met, as it were, from a national want, but at a hyper-local delivery, and delivering that message that is relevant to each of those communities. So I think it is, we will always be on this journey, but I think it's important to mark certain milestones as we go and just look to the future. Unless there's anything you want to add, Martin.
No, absolutely. And I think exercise Lima was quite an eye-opener for a lot of people. It was probably, it opened up that box that we've probably been putting lots of too difficult to answer questions in for quite some time. That's pretty much it from us. We're obviously more than happy to take any questions. We haven't got keeping an eye on the chat box as we've been going through. One, because I'm a technophobe, and two, Chris hasn't got his glasses on. So hopefully we can catch up with those as we go. But by all means, if you've got any questions, but most of all, thank you so much for giving up your time and your lunch hour to listening to what us two idiots are up to down here in Sussex. So thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Chris and Martin, for your presentation. A really great run through of what you're doing down in West Sussex, and I'm pleased to say that you obviously haven't been keeping an eye on the chat function, but I'm pleased to say there are quite a few questions already in the chat, which obviously we'll be able to pose to you over the next 30 minutes or so. Obviously, people feel free to add more of your questions to the chat function or to raise a hand, and it'd be fantastic if those that are wanting to pose a question, if you're able to either come off camera and mute, then that would be great, so that it's not just obviously my own voice relaying some of the questions. So if I can first start with the first questions in the chat, and just so we had one from Ralph, one from Vicky, and then a couple from Steph, and those were the first questions in. So maybe if Ralph, if you were willing to come off mute and our camera, and you're able to pose your question, that would be great. Do I see Ralph? Ralph may be having some difficulties, but I can pose it. So does stronger communities include voluntary sector organizations as well as more grassroots community empowerment?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, our voluntary sector, whether it be individual groups or whether it's part of a sort of VCSE organization, fortunately, I have feet in both camps, both that with an LRF, which is Sussex Resilience Forum, and I am also the co-chair of that social community resilience partnership for Sussex. So I am very connected in with that voluntary sector. It's very clear that, communities don't have to just be a village. A community can be a workplace, a university site. So it's about understanding what your community is and who works and lives within it. So, within our LRF, we've obviously got, for example, 4x4 provision, but, these people live within communities within the town. So it's important to understand when you're looking around your individual community, what assets do you have within it? And the assets are not necessarily physical assets, such as a 4x4 vehicle, which is very handy in bad weather, but also, the skills that people have or may be within your community. Just something like a first aider at work is something that you would use not just at work, but in your own community if it happened in front of you. So it's about getting people to think, what resources do you have? And absolutely making sure that those voluntary sector agencies that support your community are part of that solution and part of that communications network. So absolutely, yes, in essence.
Thank you. Before I come to Vicky and her question, Ralph has also placed in the chat a reference and a link to learning materials from Ready Scotland, introduced following Storm Arwen. So obviously for anyone interested, you're able to look in the chat and find the link there. But if Vicky Bond is willing to come off camera or mute to pose your question from the chat. Hi, Vicky. I think you're on mute, Vicky. Or you're... Yes, so Vicky's question, just while she's getting her microphone sorted, maybe Steph, if Steph is around, and Steph, you had obviously a couple of questions in the chat. So maybe if you'd like to start with the first one relating to the parish or district level. I think it relates to obviously one of the slides.
Yeah, so hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
One of the ones you said you were going out to the local communities to deliver those presentations. Was this at parish level or district level?
Right, initially this was down at parish level, real grassroots, because where we found that there was the greatest reach within the community was that understanding from the parish council. So whilst our district colleagues are engaged with us, and we also obviously promote their engagement within parishes setting up their own emergency plans, for example, which is part and parcel of this training. But yeah, we found, generally speaking, that the parish route was the most effective way in, because those were the people really that had their sort of real localized knowledge. But it was really important when I set these meetings up to point out the training is not for parish councillors alone. This is about community resilience, and therefore, the offer is out there to the entire community. Everybody can make a difference. So it was really important for them to understand this is not just about your councillors and what you can be doing, but it's about empowering the whole of communities. But it also doesn't have to be just parish councils. We've also delivered training to charity groups or those that are regionally set up. So it's almost any group of people that can make that difference, because community resilience is everybody's business, really. So we found the most effective parish, but certainly working with our colleagues in district level is really important, because they will feature in some of those mitigations and response areas that they are considering. So it is a complete circle.
Yeah, absolutely, as Chris has said. But another thing that we've found that there's advantages in working with parishes is that that they often find themselves in small clusters, whether it's through local geographic connections. They might be, a series of parishes that are within a valley, or connected through a road network or whatever, and there'd be the sort of parishes that support each other when something goes wrong, and I think you, particularly Chris, as he delivers the majority of the parish engagement, there's an awful lot of advantage in bringing parishes together in 2, 3, 4, 5 groups, shared resources, shared knowledge, shared understanding, all those sorts of things. So if you do get the opportunity to take it, grab it. But obviously, that primary link is through parish councils, because they've got the connections into the local WI groups and the mother and toddlers groups. And I'm sorry if I'm being stereotypical, but all of those local, societies and groups that use the parish hall as a venue, use the parish hall because they all share the notice board and everything else. Not only that, just between us, they're quite happy to do a lot of the legwork and advertising it for us, which saves us quite a bit of work. Don't tell them.
I know, Steph, you have another question, but I see that Maddie has a follow-on question to yours. So I'll maybe, because Vicky was having some technical issues, I'll just read out Vicky's and then we will come to your second question, Steph, and then Maddie's follow-on. But Vicky in the chat function has asked about the exercises and whether you ran them with one guide or scout group or with a collection of groups.
The particular example that I used was with one scout group, but then that did have 120 members from beavers through to explorers. So we had quite a few resources involved with that, and a lot of the local groups. If anyone who's got connections into the scouting network, certainly work with district commissioners and county commissioners in regards to promoting the work of What If, and I've been invited along on quite a few occasions to district meetings and county meetings to promote the work. One of the things I didn't mention was that just prior to COVID, in support of the Duke of Cornwall Award, we were about to launch resource packs that we could deliver through the network of libraries and also through fire stations. We are busily resurrecting that at the moment, because we do know that it's difficult to, particularly with outlying scout and guide groups and things like that, for them to access materials online that they can share readily with the young people. So we're looking to get that going again early in the new year, and if we've got any updates or if there's any of the content that we're putting into it that we can share with anybody, then please just ask. There's absolutely nothing precious about anything that we're doing. We're not, it's there for everybody that's on the call or everybody that's part of the consortium to share and take advantage of. We've got nothing that really we want to protect for ourselves, except the logo, by the way. Just so we have got a trademark on that, but that's just to protect it from being used by unscrupulous, should we say, builders, roads. We've had examples where they've turned up when there's been storms and gales, and we're part of X, Y, and Z. If you are, you can't, because you're using a protected logo. But we can release the protection on it to anyone else if they want to use it. Sorry about that, waffled a bit.
Well, thank you very much. That's very generous. So obviously Steph has another question, and if we could follow up that then with Maddie and then Melvin. And Steph, your second question is around approach to comms.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, working, say, within the warning and informing group at the LRF level, has there been any resistance to trying to get that all hazards approach and trying to combine all of the messages to push it all out in one go?
We've actually found there's been a huge buy-in. We have our LRF has a comms group, and obviously there are lead comms players from each of the upper tier local authorities that make up our warning and informing group. I think at the end of the day, because there is a common interest, and that would happen whether it was West Sussex, East Sussex, Brighton and Hove, it is a collective thing. So we found that this all hazards approach has worked not only in respect of community resilience, but also as an LRF, we've been looking more at this consequence management, because it's about looking not necessarily what was the cause, but what was the consequence of it. And therefore, this is where we can empower those local people to actually have that ability to link. So what we often do is just to provide a link to either our web page where we can then either respond to them. We also have a what if email address so that people can then contact us for sort of bespoke or, you know, tailor-made requirements for their area, because it has to be relevant. You know, it's no good saying it's a one size fits all, because clearly you're not then addressing the local issues. So from a comms perspective, no, we haven't had a challenge on that. And I think we're all very eager to look at, you know, those consequences rather than necessarily the cause. Although, yes, there are things that we can do to mitigate some of the causes.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
And just one other thing, I think, which is, I'm hoping, similar to many LRFs, is that we are always there to promote each other's messaging. So whether it be the lead agency that we then amplify that message through partner agencies, it's about promoting each of the partners' messages. And as I say, we've had no pushback on that whatsoever.
Well, thank you. And Maddie, obviously you have a follow-on question then to Steph's.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. It's been really interesting, but without this wanting to sound a bit like an interview question, were there any communities where the approach didn't work quite so well? And if so, how did you overcome that? And did you sort of identify any blockers to this?
I'll start off on this one just as a thought, because I have to say, I was initially, shall I say, skeptical about take-up. It was uncharted, untested. We'd done that significant sort of engagement session, and this is what we were coming back with. The fears that were going through my head were, isn't this a local authority job? Isn't this one of your statutory agency's functions, and you're just getting us to do your job for you? So I was quite prepared for some pushback on the messaging. I have to say, in the 3 years that I've been delivering this out to parishes, I have yet to have that challenge at a single presentation. I think what it is, we are offering them information, signposting, we're even providing resource on this occasion to support their activities. And it's not about saying that those local authorities, that the highways, that the blue light services are not going to attend, but they're going to have to triage those calls in spate conditions and prioritize life above others. But if you can get your local community to function as close to business as usual, if the only issue was that the tree was down across the road, but highways were clearing all of the strategic road networks and the A roads before they were going to start getting onto those B roads, then if the farmer's there and he can pull it off the road, you can function. So it's not about doing our job for us, it's about enabling people to help themselves. In some respects, and for that I'm taken aback, because I've got a little bit sort of, well, not blasé, but I was clearly expecting that, and I am very, very pleased to say it has never happened on that respect.
I totally endorse everything that Chris has said. We've nothing but pushing against an open door. One of the key messages that we start off with is, when we first go in to engage with the parish council or community group or whatever it is generally, we're not going to tell you anything new, because we're going to support you in what you would probably do instinctively anyway. But there are always members of the community that are prepared to take the step forward when others are taking a big step back. But what we are going to do is we're going to give you the confidence, the support, the knowledge, who to go to when it's beyond your capabilities locally. How can we assist you in making local? We wish we had this before, and I think it's one of the drivers about why we carry on. Have still got the real enthusiasm to do it that we have, is because if we didn't get a warm welcome on most occasions, then I think we'd probably be fed up by now, to be honest. But
and I suppose, just getting on from this, there is proof of the pudding, as it were, because where we've been to those communities that have taken on board the programme, I mean, we don't have to look beyond COVID. When COVID first hit, those communities, in many respects, were already resilient. They were already sorting out prescriptions for their neighbours, or checking to see whether people needed additional food, etc. These lines of communication, this knowledge and understanding of their vulnerable members within their community, were already known and identified, and and that was already there, which was brilliant. But then equally, we have used them in emergency situations. We had a really significant fire in one of the waste recycling centres here, which went on for about a week. They're very hard fires to put out because of the deep-seated nature. And we, at very short notice, when the Met Office told us that the wind was turning into a different direction, had to get about 3,000 leaflets out to those communities where the vector was going to cover that housing area the following day. And within an hour and a half, we had a team out there, and the leaflets were delivered, before we even came back for a cup of tea. So these groups really want to help, and they are a great resource that you can call upon, both in peacetime, but also, when we need help from them. So it's always been a two-way street. I hope that's helped, Maddie, but certainly that's been our experience of it.
That's a great answer, very comprehensive, thank you.
Well, thank you. And Melvin, on the chat, I see you have both a link but also a question that you'd like to pose. And after Melvin, then Carolyn has a follow-on question in relation to cost of living crisis.
Hope you can hear me. Yeah, my question following on from that, Chris and Martin, is here in Hampshire, we've got our two big cities, obviously Portsmouth and Southampton, and we find it much harder to engage in the cities than in the parishes and the rural part. I suppose I've asked a question, which then, thinking about Sussex, you haven't got any, I mean, not even Chichester's that big, any large cities, unless you've tried something in Brighton. Where have you found any good routes into more urban engagement where there aren't those defined, like you get with parishes, those defined communities?
Do you want to start off?
You start off, yeah.
Well, we've got, hi Melvin, we've got Crawley, which is, from a population point, probably the biggest urban area in certainly West Sussex, but we've also got Brighton and Hove and Eastbourne and other bits, when I'm thinking about it from a local resilience forum point of view. But I'll certainly give you an example from Crawley. Crawley, what we found, one of the ways there is to engage through local faith groups. They've got an awful lot of the connections that the outlying areas, such as parishes, had already got, or they were certainly a focal point for the local community. There were also neighbourhood groups that were active. Part of the problem is, and it does, there's no easy way of saying it, Melvin, is sometimes it takes a little bit of legwork and scratching below the surface to see what community groups are there. But if you can find active community groups that are already engaged with, a lot of the society, and really you've just got to grab them by both hands and say, look, we've got some products here that might be able to support you. But certainly faith groups have been very helpful. And Brighton and Hove, they're slightly different as they have. Pick up on that. Yeah, Chris is probably the better one to speak about Brighton.
Yeah, so Brighton and Hove, covered through sort of East Sussex, more of our colleagues there from emergency planning and the LRF. But it's interesting, obviously the unitary authorities of Brighton and Hove don't have parishes in that respect. So it is a very different makeup. It's a very different sort of government, if you like, control mechanism in that area. However, the society and communities have the same need. What is interesting there, as opposed to going via a parish route, which obviously is not appropriate, it's about looking at other groups, other communities. And I think I mentioned earlier that the situation of a workplace may well be a community of people. It's not just a geographic area on a map. So that is important. Another area that we've looked at is universities. And in fact, we've engaged with their emergency planning lead and business continuity lead for Sussex universities, and we're looking actually this is an active piece at how we can make the universities more resilient, but equally they have a huge resource on campus, whether it be students in that respect, or resource on campus for emergency rest centres. So there's all sorts of sort of symbiotic relationships that we can have with the universities, but also it is about understanding what groups make up that community. And therefore you will find that whilst you don't have the option of a parish route in on those cities, that there are definitely groups of within your community that you can target directly and actually let them do some of the legwork for you. Once you've got that point of contact, a single point of contact, you know, get them to amplify that message. And there is invariably a huge desire to want to make themselves more resilient, and this is that vehicle to enable them to do it. I hope that helps a little, Melvin.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, I mean, we're just about to try and make contact with Southampton University because fortunately one of my interns has just graduated, which is quite useful. We also have districts in Hampshire. At least 4 districts in Hampshire have no parishes either, so which is rural but no parishes. So that adds an extra dynamic as well. But thanks.
And I think just one other thing is, whilst we often go straight to the rock face, as it were, where you have that interface with districts or the lower tier authorities, whichever how you want to refer to them, again, they will already have their own networks within that community, and it's about, you know, exploring, and I won't use the word exploiting, but it's working with people because it is for everybody. So again, districts are a very important part of the process, because in fact they're part of the solution as well. So so yeah, I would definitely link in with those colleagues.
Couldn't agree more as a district council.
Just one other, Melvin, which is an avenue that might be worth exploring if you haven't already, is putting football loyalties to one side. I'm a massive supporter of Brighton and Hove Albion Football Club, but the work that Albion do in the community, and I think Southampton and Portsmouth have got similar community ethics. Yes,
we got the Saints Foundation and Pompey in the community. Yeah.
Hugely
I'm a trustee of the latter. Yeah.
Yeah, but we've found them hugely supportive in making inroads that we probably couldn't. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much. So just before coming on to Caroline's question, this is everyone else's opportunity for to ask any burning questions. Otherwise, this will be the final one of our conversation. But please put your hand up or add anything into the chat. So Caroline.
Thanks. Hi both. I mean, I think this is a bit of a follow-on to both Maddie and Melvin's question, because I think our experience is we've often found it much harder to engage with the deprived communities, perhaps within the urban areas where people have got less spare time to participate. And I guess that kind of worries me as we head into cost of living crisis. And I was wondering whether you'd done any thinking around how we can support communities to maintain that resilience as people shift about between rented housing more often and have less ability to kind of do that prep work because they're more concentrated on getting the next meal. So it's a very, very open and rather rambling question, but I guess it was just picking your brains on if you had any experience of it.
Well, I can probably provide some comment on it. What you raise is certainly a challenging question because these are often the voices less heard are the ones that are more difficult to reach in many cases. I think where it's important, and it's about, we were saying, this holistic approach, this sort of making every contact count, is that those we have community hubs as well, and certainly Brighton and Hove have significant street workers to actually support those communities who are living on the streets. So it's making sure that those people have the resources that they need and that link into community that will make a difference for them. I don't see there's ever going to be a one outcome that will resolve this. It is a national situation, and some areas certainly are more challenged than others. But I think it's important to look out to those community hubs that reach out and finding out what they need. There's also those warm spaces that are being worked on, and our district colleagues have been working quite heavily on that. Primarily, yes, for the winter, but you know, people on the streets have needs all year round. So it is an important part of communities, and we need to make sure that they have a voice. So I think it's exploring those connections that are already there, and just seeing if there's more we can do to support their work. And if there is a shortage, are there groups within our sort of remit that we can reach out to help mitigate some of that and to provide that resource? So it is a challenging one. I think it will change from area to area, but it is important that we keep our ear to the ground and that we leave our doors open to these questions and challenges, and make sure that we can pass that on to people that can make that difference.
So, well, thank you very much.
Sorry,
go ahead. Go ahead, Martin.
Sorry, I was just going to add just briefly on the end of Chris's comments. We certainly engage with food banks.
Hi, Martin. I think, yeah, there's some technical issues and your screen has frozen. Yeah, so.
This meeting is being recorded.
I think Chris and Martin have been experiencing. Oh, yeah, you're back. Yeah, some technical issues throughout. It's freezing weather, but at some points there's also been kind of frozen screens momentarily. But I trust that we haven't missed anything critical. That the recordings have picked up your excellent presentations and obviously the fulsome answers to the various questions that have been posed. So just like to thank Chris and Martin for presenting your work here today. And of course, as one of the cases within the National Preparedness Commission report that Duncan referenced earlier, obviously people can follow some more of those links to read more about, and also I guess to contact you directly in terms of questions that perhaps haven't been posed today. So thank you very much, and to thank everyone also for showing up. Obviously the next webinar will be on the 12th of January, where we'll also be looking at another case from the National Preparedness Commission report. So details of that webinar will be sent out within the next few days. As I mentioned, obviously all of the webinars are recorded, and the recordings will also be made available through the NCSR website and YouTube channel. So I'd just like to thank all of you for giving up of your time today. Yeah, I look forward to seeing you all in the new year. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. Merry Christmas if it's not too early.
Yeah.
And Merry Christmas. Thank you.
Thank you.